Good morning. Fuck. My brain doesn't work very well. Never works very well, but I'm trying to share this out as much as I can. Hope everybody's having a grand morning. I've got stuff to do in the middle of the day today, so I thought I'd come in this morning and do a live for a couple of hours before I had to go and do that. So I'm only going to be in here until roughly 10 o'clock my time, which it's 8 now. Good morning. It's great. It's good to see you back, Monsoon. I always like making new friends. And it's awesome to see you legal. You didn't just start yesterday, though, so I've seen you. I enjoy your company. I saw you've been doing lives at night, too. I've been able to watch you in a couple of lives at night. It's been a lot of fun, legal. Just trying to get it sent out to as many people as possible, and then I'll go ahead and get myself kind of settled and started. We're already up and over on YouTube. Thank you, thank you. I really enjoy seeing how many different people are getting on here and sharing information and getting information out there legal. I think for me, that's one of the best things because, people are like, oh, I don't like the internet and I don't like social media because it does all of these negative things. And it's like, yeah, I can grab that. I can get that. Um, I'm going to so mispronounce that if I try and say it, mamas. I know it's washte, but I always mispronounce it. I think it's ihane, but I always pronounce it. Good morning, beautiful one. Data ownership, I don't know. Can you define that just a little bit better for me? And maybe I have thoughts on it. I don't know though. Because I'm not exactly sure. Like, I know there's a little bit of information, or I know a little bit of stuff, but I don't know a whole lot because it's not like I find that if I try and think of too many things or try and find out too many informations or things like that, that I'm like, my brain doesn't work very well. It only acquires so much information, and then I start losing bits of information or I start not remembering bits of information. So I don't pull too many together. Um, so, yeah. So I think that, I think that we should have the ability to, so I think that, I totally agree with Marx because I think that Marx's stuff, is still very based in capitalism. And I think that all the communism that we've had is still too capitalistic based to really be true communism. But Marx's ideas, he has a concept within his ideas when he talks about the price of your labor, right? And he talks about the fact that we're basically trading our entire selves for $1, right? But we don't get the opportunity to set the price of our labor, the price of who we are. And it talks also within that about the ability to own the things you create, right? Like if I flint knap a knife, it's my knife. And if I gift it to somebody or I sell it to somebody, it becomes their knife, but I've created it, right? So the ownership of that, right? Thank you, Native. And so for me, I feel like we should have ownership over the things that we make. Like if we're making something, we should have ownership over it. I'm not really big on the idea of ownership, though I do believe like this is my rock. Like I was given this rock, it's my rock. Somebody gave me my rock. Right. So I believe that the things that I make and I create, I should have the say over, right? So I totally believe that we should have that concept or that ability. I also think that I agree with the concept that once you put it out there, you don't get a lot of choice over it. Like if I were to give this rock away, or if I were to sell this rock, then I have no choice over what's happening with this rock. Whether or not I made this rock, it's rock. I mean, nobody made it, right? But whether or not I made it or not, once I give it away or sell it, it's no longer under my purview, right? So I also kind of feel like I put it out there on the web, and though, it's for me, it's a real back and forth thing because then you also get into the concept of people being able to actually like take what I've made and twist it, screw it up or split it up because you can take data and make it into something else completely, right? And so I think that I totally believe in a free. I believe that we have the ability and should have the ability to share information freely and to create freely and to utilize the things that we create in the way that we believe that we should utilize the things that we create. So, like if I believe that I'm creating a video, I have the right to utilize that video in the way that I create it, right? Of course, TikTok has a platform, so TikTok has the right to exercise the rules that they create on their platform, right? Um, it's a back and forth. I think that we should own the things that we create. Bottom line. Um, I think that I can understand that once we let them go, we no longer own them, right? In a communist system, no. In a Marxist system, somewhat because Marx is still a capitalist. Marx is still a capitalist. Everything that we think of like communism today and everything that we think of like socialism today, even like what's the other one? The other side, fascism, even that, it's still capitalism. It's all capitalism. Everything for the last 10,000 years that's based on a stratified society is still based on capitalism. Okay, so if your data is curing cancer, right, or can identify cancer, I okay, so if you're working towards communal growth, then when you create things like insulin, right? When you're working towards communal growth, insulin is one of those things that should be free because it's a communal growth thing, right? And yet, people should have the right um, to create a livelihood so that they can live comfortably or safely off of the things that they're doing, right? Um, so if you are in a society that is based on capital and is not based on communal, then absolutely somebody should have the right to sell the things. I think that there should be a cap in the way they do them, right? Because like insulin should not be $900 a vial, right? Especially life-saving things, right? So if you're based in an economy that is capitalistic based, you should have the right to sell the things of your creation. I don't believe that we should be in a capitalistic based society. So I think that ideally things should be a communal use. Things should be a communal thought process, right? Everybody should be fed, everybody should be housed, everybody should be taken care of, and it should all be on a communal basis to me. Yet I also acknowledge and understand that we live in a capitalistic based world right now, right? It is all based on a capitalistic thought process. And we have to do things to create uh, the finance because that's what it is right now, so that we can live, right? Because if I'm not, well, for me personally, like if I don't have my VA, if I don't have my, I'm a war vet, I'm disabled. If I don't have my income coming from that, then I don't have a home over my shoulders, right? So in a society where you have to have something to trade for safety and security, you should be able to acquire the thing that you need to trade for safety and security. In an economy or in a society where everything for safety and security is given with your citizenship in that society, then I don't think, to me, reciprocity and gift giving culture is a lot better. But again, we get to the fact that we have to live in what we're living in now. We have to live and deal in what we're living with and dealing with now. If we don't live and deal with what we're living and dealing with now, we can't, you know, we are all one species. And that's one thing that I know that a lot of people sometimes mistake with some of the things that we talk about in here. And so that's absolutely one thing to, clarify. Um, we share 95% of our DNA with bananas, right? Of the other 5%, all Homo sapiens share like 99.9% DNA. There's little tidbits of genetic information that come from other species. Those little tidbits of genetic information don't separate our species into different subspecies, different races, different anything. They just are little tidbits of information that almost always make us better suited for the places that we're living in, because those other species had adapted in those places. Um, so we are still all one species because we share 99.9% of our DNA, right? the other ghost species, the other species that we have within us, do not make enough of a difference to separate us out into even different races, let alone different subspecies or different species, right? A unicorn Pegasus is a great thing to have as your spirit thought process or the spirit that you want to imbue. That's absolutely amazing, right? Um, what is the difference between single point genetic mutation and mutation for? I do not know. So I study our evolution and who we were, but I study our evolution and who we were through a social standpoint. I um, I understand DNA like this much. It doesn't syllable because it's like H1, B2, 3, it doesn't syllabic. And I'm a very word person, word based and syllable based person. And so I can't, because it doesn't syllabic, I can't wrap my brain around it enough to understand how it all works enough. So I don't do genetics. I have some base understanding of genetics, uh, college level, I guess, base understanding of genetics, but I don't, it's not something that I can understand enough to really explain out. The person behind me is a Gervasian. This is from 40,000 to 30,000 years ago in the lower part of Europe. And this is nice fighting. That's good. Um, I'm glad you found me. What's a you problem? And you're welcome to leave. You didn't have to announce you're out. That's so fun for you. I mean, but so this is a Gervasian. The Gervasians, they're not the first people in Europe. The first people in Europe are the Aleutians. They're the genetic descendants of the first people in Europe, though, and they're the first people in Europe who are there without having the Neanderthals there. Let me go ahead and do my opening. There's a couple of questions that will answer. My name is Widda. That's what I go by. I am an archaeologist, an anthropologist, a historian, a healer, a storyteller, and I have several degrees in many different fields, medicine and anthropology being the main ones. I have studied archaeology and anthropology and healing for 40 something odd years. I'm older than I look, but I started studying those things very young. I did indigenous healing from the time I could walk, and learned to read in archaeology and history books based on Black and indigenous authors' writings. And I then went out and got some degrees. I use TikTok as a place to teach base level information. I don't work in outside of this. This isn't even work. I am a disabled war vet. It's impossible for me to actually go out and work. So I do this to I write, and so this is kind of like a part of my writing, and because there's some information that I really need to get out there. I also feel that I don't think. I also feel like the fact that education is gate kept behind a $40,000 a year paywall, and language that is so verbose that even people with extensive degrees and very broad vocabularies have a hard time reading it and understanding it, is not acceptable. And so I come into TikTok and try and give a base level of information. I have a website that's right there. And on my website, I compile bibliographies of some of the things that I talk about. They're just base level articles so that you can go and you can read the article and maybe find more information. You'll dig in a little bit deeper. I believe that we learn better when we search ourselves and we put the effort into it ourselves. And so I am a teacher. I'm not paid by anybody to teach. We're all teachers, just like we're all students. And I, as a mother and a grandmother, also teach, right? And have been doing that most of my life. So, yes, but not like somebody pays me to do it. But I also don't get paid to do jack shit because I couldn't possibly put myself underneath somebody else's control again. Um, and for me, I utilize this just so that we can get out more information. There's so much information that most people just don't have at a base level that we should all have. I will tell you how race has been debunked. It does no longer, the theory of race no longer exists. It is a colonial construct from its start, and it's used to justify atrocity. I can show you how we're all nurturing and communal. I, in my chat, do not like to see racism. You won't like my response if you use racism within my chat. Uh, Racism still exists very much within our society, and there is still culture and ethnicity, absolutely. And those are very important things, especially culture. And I don't deal very well with phobias based on gender, desire, or religion. Um, I There are three biological sexes. Gender is an identity that you yourself get to understand and respect for yourself. Nobody else gets to decide it for you. Your sexual desire is totally on you unless it harms other people, and then we have a problem. And your religion is totally on you as well. I don't want to talk about your God. If your God is God, he's a narcissist and I don't like him, so I don't want to talk about him. But I also don't want phobias based on it. Like, I don't want Islamophobia or anti-Semitism within my chat. Um, Islamic, Islamophobia, not Islame. Islamophobia or anti-Semitism within my chat. We try and keep this as a safe space. TikTok gives everybody with 1,000 followers live space, and so I use my live space for these purposes to try and get out information. My focus is in anthropology and focuses in anthropology and archaeology or paleoanthropology. So I look at prior to roughly 10,000 years ago for the most part. I've done a lot of study in history, so I know some stuff after 10,000 years ago, after we start writing down shit. And I also have had a broad focus on the Bronze and Iron Age Celts and Scandinavians. And so I do put some effort into that. One of the purposes for my coming into TikTok is being asked by many members of many different communities that I belong to educate people of European descent on how to find their own history and their own culture without appropriating other cultures, because many allies out there and accomplices out there are trying to find their own ancestry and their own way to reconnect with their own ancestry without appropriating from Black or Indigenous people. And so I was asked to share information on how to do that because I know how to do that. And so I have come in to do that too. And so a lot of this today, and when you see the European ancestry, the main focus of that is to give information on how to find your own culture if you're of purely European descent without appropriating Black or Indigenous culture. And so that's what we're doing today. This is a Gervasian, and the Gervasians are from 30 or 40 to 30,000 years ago within England, or not England, fuck off. It's early in the morning. Within Europe. And they're not the first culture to be in Europe. They are the descendants of the first genetic group and first culture to be in Europe. They are the first culture to be in Europe alone, without Neanderthals, without other species of humans in Europe alongside of them. And we have a lot of knowledge when we look at that. So I don't think that we have a lot of evidence of neurodivergence in the past. I would state, though, that neurodivergence is more normal than neuronormal. I would state that every time we've created something new, every time we've come up with something bright and beautiful, every invention, every thought process, these are all neurodivergence, right? They're all evidences of a diverging neuro thought process, right? So I would state that there is plenty of evidence of neurodivergence within our past. I would state that I don't see that people have done a lot of studies on it. And I don't think that people actually consider it to be neurodivergence. I think that you have to be neurodivergent to understand it's neurodivergent. Um, and I totally believe that neurotypical isn't really typical, right? I think that, if 80% of the society is neurodivergent and 20% of the society is neurotypical, which one is the actual typical, right? So I think that there's a lot of evidence. I just don't think that people would call it evidence, right? So, well, it can mean you could trace back to this dude. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you do, right? So just because the Gravatians are the first that we see there, and just because their genetic descendants live across Europe currently, doesn't mean everybody within Europe is a genetic descendant of the Gravatians. We have constant waves of migration and movement through and immigration, right? Constantly as a species, one of the things that is really just in like our species and Homo erectus, we're extremely mobile. We're constantly moving around. We're constantly bringing exclusionary. I'm not using exclusionary language. I'm not sure why. Anyways, there's a constant movement of genetics, right? There's people are like, so a group is going to go and they're going to stay in a place, yet they're still going to have people moving and coming in, right? So you might be a direct descendant of the Gravachians, right? Or you might actually be a later migration over. Like, so the Picts um, are the Y-DNA for the Picts is found in Turkey today, right? So they find the Y-DNA for the Picts in Turkey and on the Iberian Peninsula and up in Scotland, right? And so that is a migration that happened at like 7,000 years ago, right? So that's like 20 years after the, or 20,000 years after the Gravachians are gone, right? So um, there's a constant influx of newer DNA. So you might not be a direct descendant of the Gravachians themselves. The Celts might not be a, like all of the Celtic people might not be a direct descendant of the Gravachians. All of the Germanic people might not be a direct descendant of the Gravachians, but this is the first culture within. And then, so maybe a mitochondrial line might be a direct descendant from the Gravachians and a Y line isn't, or maybe part of your mitochondrial line comes from the Gravachians and part of it doesn't. Maybe none of it does. Maybe you're later, your people are later genetic line in. Maybe if you trace them back to 40,000 years ago, they're in, the Levant area. Maybe you are a direct descendant of the Gravachians. It's a little bit of a, here and there. They are the first people within Europe, and their genetics do carry down within Europe, right? They are the first groups that are, living there without any other humans around and are forming culture within Europe. And they are a group that we know a lot about because of the artifacts that they leave behind, the belongings that they leave behind. And yet they are not everybody from Europe's direct ancestors, if that makes sense, right? And it's really about the fact that again, there's a constant movement. We like to think that we moved to one place and then we stayed there. Even people in Turtle Island, which is North America, there's still a constant flux of movement. That Arctic Circle, there's a constant flux of going back and coming across and meeting people in the middle of that Arctic Circle. So there's, no matter where we are on this planet, we have a constant movement of genetics and a constant movement of concept and of thought process and of culture. Um, so with the Gravachians, because they've been as a group within Europe for about 10,000 years by the time they get to the Gravachian culture. And during that 10,000 years, Neanderthal were in Europe with them, um, they are kind of the first to really settle into this space and have been there for a while and to have really started to adapt to the space of Homo sapiens, right? By 10,000 years, they had really adapted into the space that they needed to at that point of time, though they are still very dark of skin and dark of eye. We don't see that the light of eye comes until later. And then, of course, we don't see that the light of skin comes until much, much, much later. And so with that, their adaptations to the space aren't as broad as we want to think of them think that they could be within that 10,000 years. Yet they've already adapted a language to the space. They've already adapted a cultural understanding to this space, and they've already become indigenous to that space, right? Um, I, I'm globally mixed. One of my ancestries is Gaelic. And so this is Irish Gaelic in Ogham, written in Ogham for speak out. And I have step up on the back of my ankle. So when we are looking at the Gravachians, what we're looking at is a group of people that as they're moving into this space, well, they're already into this space at this point of time, as they're moving within this space, during the Gravachians time frame, from that 40 to 30,000 years ago, we see that they're up higher with the Neanderthals. If you look at Europe like this, right? And I'm going to go from the Mediterranean to the Arctic. Okay, so if you look at where the Gravachians are, they're about halfway up when they're with the Neanderthals at about 50,000 years ago. So the ice has receded. The Neanderthals are moving from the Levant area back into Europe, and they're taking sapiens with them from the Levant area. They're meeting up with the other Neanderthals in the Levant area, or in the European area. The Gravachians are settling, or the Aluatians, the predecessors of the Gravachians, are settling in with the Neanderthals. They're becoming a part of this space. The Neanderthals end up being gone because they get completely enveloped within Homo sapien. By the time Homo sapien meets Neanderthal, there's about 10,000 of their species left, and they're extremely genetically narrow. So getting new genes was good for them. And so they become a part of us. And so by this time, by 40,000 years ago, we're settling in the Gravachians around half of Europe, right? Half of the lower half of Europe is settled by Gravachians. The Neanderthals have been mixed in. The whole genome of Neanderthal is gone, and we're settled. The ice starts coming back. There's a small ice age and it starts pushing everybody down. And so the Gravachians go back down to the edge of the Mediterranean. And we see that the Gravachians are along the edge of the Mediterranean in the Iberian Peninsula. We have three distinct groups genetically of Gravachians at this time. We have one that's along the Iberian Peninsula, one that is in the middle way between the Iberian Peninsula, and the Italian Peninsula. And then there's a group right above the Italian Peninsula. As the ice pushes them down from middle, they go down into these spaces along the Mediterranean basin. And as the ice starts coming back, we see that the Gravachians above the Latin Peninsula, the Italian Peninsula, actually take a new Y DNA back with them as they move back up. So this is one of these examples of how we have a group that has been there forever, but they're getting an influx of new DNA. There's not necessarily a full replacement, but a partial replacement of their Y DNA line. Mitochondrial DNA is your mother line, Y DNA is your father line. So this group of Gravation is getting a replacement Y from the Levant area, and as they're moving back up, they're taking that replacement Y with them. Their mitochondrial line is the same, and the other two groups stay at the same genetics. So as the ice is receding, they're moving up into Europe. We see that as they're moving up into Europe, they're only getting about, again, halfway up into Europe because of the way that the ice is receding, because we don't see that the ice starts to recede from England, the island of Britain, until about 27,000 years ago is when it starts leaving the lower tip of Britain. So as the ice is starting to recede and it's moving up, people are moving up into the area. 27,000 years ago is after the period of the Gravachians. This would be into the Solutreans would be the replacement culture on the Iberian Peninsula. I don't know if I remember what the replacement name, and it is important to understand that these are names that we're applying to people. They're not names that these people understood themselves to be, right? They're not, and we're applying these names to a period of 10,000 years. We're stating that a period of 10,000 years is these people, right? So it's not necessarily that they would have understood themselves that way. It's not necessarily that they would have interacted, even thought of themselves as a continuous culture, maybe, right? So as they're moving back up into the European area, we did all have dark skin. So as we're moving back up into the European area, we're seeing that we're getting back settled into space. So let me, as we're doing this, I want to go over just a few definitions because there's a few things that aren't really understood by definition point in society today. So let me go into a couple of different definitions. The first definition that I want to go into is tribe versus band. We like to think of things as tribal, as primitive, but tribe only means a community based on genetic lineage. And band means a community not based on genetic lineage. So the Israelites would be a tribe, they're a community based on genetic lineage. The United States would be a band, it's a community not based on genetic lineage, right? So when we're looking at those two definitions, it's really important to understand. A lot of times we like to say tribal is primitive, but tribal does not mean primitive. It just means a community based on genetic lineage. And it is important to understand that there is a difference, even within our history, of the difference of based on genetic lineage and not based on genetic lineage, because as a species, we very much need to have the interaction of others of our species. We must have community to subsist. And so a band is important to us to have a community that's not based on genetic lineage, because sometimes our genetic lineage doesn't give us enough people to be okay, enough people to subsist. And so we need several different people. This leads into how we were created as a species. There's a very new understanding of how our species comes about and how Homo erectus, our predecessor, comes about. We have thought for the longest time that the way that species speciates is through isolation. And now we realize that species will actually speciate through something that's been thought of as theoretical, which is speciation through convergence. The last year, we realized that Homo erectus and us both speciate through convergence, right? So Speciation through convergence is when you have many different closely related species. So cousin species with a recent common ancestor that are able to intermix, and they create a new species out of that intermixing. What we have found is that Homo erectus, a species that is kind of our grandfather, has a development out of three different species. It develops out of Paranthropus boisei. You might have seen this one in the news in the last year, where we realized that they're our first tool maker. And Homo habilis, who we've known of for a long time, handyman, who we thought was our first tool maker, and Australopithecines, who everybody knows as Lucy. So we now realize that Homo erectus comes as a speciation of convergence from these three species, and that's why Homo erectus is so good at what Homo erectus did. Homo erectus is the first species to make it clear across the globe, and they did. They made it to every area. We have evidence of Homo erectus in Turtle Island and Abya, North America and South America. We have evidence of Homo erectus in Australia. So Homo erectus is literally making it everywhere, and everywhere they go, that speciation through isolation happens, and that's how we get Neanderthal and Denisovan and Florensis and all of these other species that we know of. When we come as a speciation through convergence, we come as a speciation through convergence in Africa. Our oldest specimen of us, our oldest of us, is actually in Morocco, and it's 300,000 years ago. And then we have another one in Ethiopia that's about 200 and something thousand years ago, and another one in South Africa right around the same time. I'm not watching too much. It does look like my moderators are pretty much on it. Guys, if it gets bad, will one of you guys pin a message to me and I'll go ahead and turn them off. I do tend to turn them off if they get too bad for everybody. But I also try and ignore them as much as possible, because if I don't ignore them, then I get distracted. So when we're coming about as a speciation through convergence, awesome, thank you. It is because of the fact that we are living in bands at this time. When we look at finds from Africa just prior to us and in the beginning of us, what we find is that you will find an ergaster, an ancestor, and a heidelbergensis and an erectus all living in the same camp. And how we find these is because somebody's all living in the same cave together, and there's like 8 different people, and they're all different people. The cave collapses, and now we find these 8 different people, and it's obvious that they're all living together. So this is, again, a community not based on genetic lineage. And the fact that we have these communities that are not based on genetic lineage, we see that those bands coming together, right, creates a species out of convergence. So in this place up in Morocco, you might have had like a heidelbergensis and an ancestor. They come together, and their child is the first Homo sapien up there. And you might have in Ethiopia that an ancestor and an ergaster come together, and their child is the first Homo erectus or Homo sapien there. And in South Africa, you might have had an erectus and a rudolfensis come together, and their child is the first Homo sapien down there. So in each of these bands, a couple of these mixes create different Homo sapien children within their group. The Homo sapien children within this group, they don't think of themselves as really any different than anybody else. No child thinks of itself as different than their parent. And yet they have parents that look different, right? That their parents might have completely different skeletal morphology from each other. They might look and walk and act completely different in their physicality, right? So we come to being in a time and in a space where multiple looks, multiple concepts, multiple peoples are all living together, and we come out of that. So when we're looking at that, we need to understand that our brain sees other human as human. It doesn't see other human as different. It doesn't matter if it's a different species of human. It sees other human as human. I need a minute. I'm starting to get sick. 1 second. I apologize. Being disabled is really hard for me sometimes. Some mornings I'm really nauseous, and I started getting really nauseous. I apologize. It's fine. It's just it's the chronic. It's the chronic shit, right? It happens. I hadn't done anything to take care of it this morning because I hadn't actually been dealing with it yet this morning. And so I had, yeah, yeah. So I am. So we're coming into creation as a species of convergence, and we're coming into creation. I've tried a few different things. Right now, I'm just using some alternative medicines to deal with the nausea. I've been trying to avoid. I'm on Adderall now, and they just put me on an antidepressant. And so I'm trying to avoid doing too many different medicines. I have a few different herbs that I take, um, but sometimes for the nausea in the morning, I just take a little green so that the nausea will go away. Yeah, will go away for a while. I find I can't like eat anything with it because if I try and eat something with it, it just doesn't work. Then I'm like throwing it up. So I have to like smoke a little bit, but I try and I'm not I don't like to do too much anymore because it kind of counteracts some of my other medicines, and so I'm like trying to keep it down so it's not something I automatically do in the morning anymore like I used to, especially when I was nauseous for like a year and a half. I'm not as nauseous in the morning all mornings anymore either. Like that's the first time I felt like I was going to throw up in probably a month. So but um and I do think that they do some of them though that I mean I feel like I had this morning nausea for a while. So we see other humans as humans, right? We're looking at parents that look different than us, right? Parents that not only like they most likely don't have a different skin tone, right? Well, what they do have is different noses. Like their mid face might stick out like this, or their lower face might stick out like this, and they have a very low forehead, and they might have very heavy brow ridges and a long skull, or a bun at the back of their skull, or even the remnants of kind of a ridge on their skull, right? So we're looking at people that are our parents and our cousins and our siblings and our grandparents, and they look totally different than us. So we're not looking at these people who look totally different than us and thinking, oh my God, you're evil. You look different than me. We're looking at people who look totally different than us and we're going, your family, your family. So we start out of speciation through convergence within bands. And this is why bands are an extremely important concept. And the difference between tribe and band is an extremely important understanding, besides the fact that way too many people associate tribal with primitive, and it is not. So, with the way that we're speciating, we start in roughly three different groups, they think, to start with, multiples, right? Above two. And there is a convergence of us. Now, I want you to think we all, if you've read anything about history or Clan of the Cave Bear or even different indigenous nations or things like that, you'll note that a lot of times there will be a broad nation that has many different tribes or bands underneath the broad nation, and that those tribes or bands will come together and meet every few years. Maybe it's for trading. Maybe it's, you all meet at the same place in the summer to hunt. Um, you're going to meet. So if you have these three groups and Homo sapien children start popping up in these three groups, when these groups are coming together to meet, because we've always been doing this, we've always been broad groups with small groups that converge, always, right? So as these groups are coming together and meeting, the child in Ethiopia is seeing the child in Morocco and going, oh, you look like me, And so you get this, oh, you're new, you look like me. And this convergence coming of these different groups of Homo sapiens. And this convergence of these different groups of Homo sapiens finally settles us into being our own species at roughly 135,000 years ago to 125,000 years ago. Now, at this time, ice has covered half of the planet, so sea levels are lower. So the Arabian Peninsula is attached to Africa. I'm not calling it African because African is a nation, it is a broad country, and we're talking about different spaces in a country that is bigger than South America, right? Like we're talking about a huge continent, not country, huge continent that has different spaces and countries within it, right? So people are coming together, and as they're coming together, there's this convergence of Homo sapien, roughly 125 to 135,000 years ago. But by this time, we also see some of our earliest Homo sapiens are living in the Levant area with Neanderthals who have come down from the north. At 150,000 years ago, we see that Homo sapien and Neanderthal are in two caves at a 5-minute walk from each other in the Levant area. And in these two caves, we see a convergence of understanding. We see this pop of knowledge for us and this pop of knowledge for Neanderthal. Because ever two come together, whenever two come together, it, ideas explode, right? Think of if you live in a very narrow box and you only have a very narrow thought, it's impossible to have new thoughts, especially if you train yourself to only have the narrow thoughts, right? Don't think of new things. That's not right. Don't look for new things. Don't learn new things, right? So if you're in a very narrow box and everything has always been this way, you don't pop with these new ideas. If you have your box and this box is here and these two boxes meet, new ideas start. So it is roughly around 100,000 years ago that we start to see the idea of burial within Homo sapiens and Neanderthal, the idea of art within Homo sapiens and Neanderthal, and the idea of self-identity within Homo sapiens and Neanderthal. We start to see a lot of this happening first within Neanderthal. We see our first cave art within Neanderthal, and we see our first burial within Neanderthal. And then we start to see that both Neanderthal and Homo sapiens are creating a identity of self, wearing different jewelry, using ochre and charcoal to paint their bodies. We see that this identity of self doesn't distinguish, doesn't differentiate between it differentiates I am me and you are you. It doesn't say I'm a species and you're a species, right? It says, I understand these things and I bring these things to the table. When we are identifying self, we identify us, right? Consciousness of self. What am I good at? What do I think? What do I do? So our first sense of identity is what do I think? What am I good at? What did I do? What do I do? What do I bring to the table? What do I bring to the community? So I'm going to identify self and you're going to identify self so that when I meet you, I know you really like to flint knap. You're really good at jewelry making, right? So before we become solidified as a species, we are already meeting the next species. We are already meeting a new species that we haven't seen before, that we haven't come in contact before. We come out of a convergence of many different species. At least two of those species are the parent species of Neanderthal, because Heidelbergensis and Ancestry are the parent species of Neanderthal. So those two of the species that we come from are parent species, or siblings, right, of the parents Neanderthal come from, right? So when we are looking at this, we're not seeing a different species as in you're bad. We're seeing, oh, you're new. That's something cool. That's a new idea. That sparks this within me. This is what we are taking at 50,000 years ago when we start to leave the Levant area to go to Europe. Now, we have already left the Levant area to go to at least two other spaces. Our understanding currently is that Homo sapien has been in Australia for 70,000 years, and that people make it to Turtle Island and Abya, Homo sapien make it to Turtle Island and Abya by 50,000 years ago, okay? The separation of Turtle Island and Abyala's genetic DNA is 54,000 years ago, right? So we know that people are in other spaces by the time that Homo sapien is getting into Europe. Oh, that's not life. That's us. There's a difference between us and life, right? There's a difference between us and all life. And everybody's creation stories are right. That's how your people were created. That doesn't mean that that's how every person was created. That means it's how your people were created. That's how your people got to where they are and became indigenous, right? So as we're moving up into Europe at 50,000 years ago, we're moving up with the Neanderthals that we have. We're taking our Neanderthal genetics because we've already made children with these people, and we're moving up into their space. And as we're moving up into their space, right, we are immigrating. When we are moving into a space that is occupied by other people and we are becoming a part of the culture in that space, this is immigration. When we are moving into a space that is not occupied by anybody else, that's migration. Migration is also moving in a pattern along the seasons so that you can sustain yourself, right? This is what we call hunter-gatherers in the hunter-gatherer-collector thought process. One migrates through the seasons of the year and collects food. One stays in a central location and through the season of the year goes out, stays for a couple of weeks, comes back. So we're migrating when we are moving through a space that is unoccupied or into a space that is our seasonal migration route. Colonization, which many of us are dealing with today, and many of us are trying to decolonize from, is moving into a space that is already occupied, like with immigration, and yet instead of immigration, you move into a space that's already occupied, you become a culture, part of the culture there. Colonization moves into a space that's already occupied and says, your culture doesn't work here anymore. I'm replacing it with my culture and my government. And this is, of course, often done through violence because you can't tell people that they can't live their life anymore without violence, usually. So this is the differences between immigration, migration, and colonization. So as we are moving into Europe with Neanderthal, we are immigrating into Europe with Neanderthal, as long as Neanderthal is a part of the people there and a part of the culture there. Now we are moving with our families who are Neanderthal at this point in time because we have been mixing together with Neanderthal and Homo sapien together in the Levant area. So we're moving with our Neanderthal families back home to where the Neanderthals were as the ice is receding. And as we're moving into these areas, we're adapting with the knowledge that the Neanderthals are giving us to the areas. We are, because the Neanderthals had speciated in this space, also becoming indigenous to space. Between the fact that we have Neanderthal DNA and the fact that as we're moving into this space, we become a part of the biome. Our purpose on this planet, how we were made and why we were made, is all scientific by the biome itself. The biome needs things to fulfill parts. Just like your body needs different body parts to fulfill a whole biome, the world itself needs different parts, different body parts, a stomach, a liver, colon, like an intestinal tract. It needs all of these different body parts to perform a whole biome and be in homeostasis. And our part in the biome, created by the biome, the reason that we are nurturing and communal and the reason that we are creative is because we tend the biome. So as we are moving up into the biome with Neanderthals who are also created to tend the biome, because everything that is human is created to tend the biome, right? We see that we're taking the Neanderthal understanding of tending the biome and we're sinking in and becoming indigenous to this space. Now, this is how people become indigenous in any space. They move into it, whether there are people already there or not. If there are people already there, they become a part of the people that are already there. And they sink into an understanding of how to tend that part of the biome, how to interact with the biome in a positive way and in a positive level, and to keep that interaction into a space where you might actually perform what you're supposed to be doing as your niche in the biome. Everything has a niche, and we all are understanding this. We all grasp this when we think of things like trees give us oxygen, right? Ants, out there gathering and doing all their things, create a kind of a cleaning system for the biome, right? We know that the circle of life and the circle of food, right? A plant grows to fulfill the nutritional needs of, different animals, as well as to fulfill the nutritional needs of the earth itself, as well as perform several different functions, right? So we all know that these things exist, that we are in a circle and a biome, and that we all have this interaction with the biome that fulfills a niche. This is our part within the biome. So as we are moving into the biome and as we are getting into this space with the Neanderthals who were speciated here, and so they understood this space because they adapted specifically to this space, we start sinking into this space and understanding how to tend this space and becoming a part of the biome in this space, okay? Now, becoming a part of the biome and becoming indigenous to space really they're everything about you, right? When we look at the indigenous cultures that we still have across the globe, there are cultures across the globe that still like have bare minimum contact, like down in Abiyala, right? There are cultures in Europe that are indigenous cultures that have been there 7, 8,000 years, 10,000 years. There are cultures in Africa who have been there and are subsisting as their culture for 70, 120,000 years. There's cultures in Australia that have been there 70,000 years that have subsisted in that place. There are cultures up here in Turtle Island that have been here 50,000 years and subsisted in this place. As you're sinking into and becoming a part of the biome, this sinking in and becoming a part of the biome adapts your language. It adapts every part of you. It starts with the adaptation of the things that you need the most. Now, we like to think that vitamin D is such an important thing that it took us from dark to light. Vitamin D is important. There are many ways that we can get vitamin D. Adapting our skin tone is one of the most amazing and beautiful things about the Homo genus. We get this from Homo erectus. The ability to get lighter comes at 900,000 years ago, and that ability to get lighter starts first within Heidelbergensis and Neanderthal in Europe. And this ability to get lighter is an adaptation. It is our body's ability to adapt that is this amazing, gorgeous thing that gives us the ability to move across the globe, along with our expedient bipedalism, the fact that we can walk everywhere. So the genetic advantage, the thing that is advantageous for our species, is to have dark skin. This is because of the fact that we speciate in a space that has extremely high sun content. Dark skin is more melanin in a specific, in a condension. It's more condensed, more tightly packed. We all have melanin in our skin. The tone that you perceive is based on how tightly compacted that melanin is, right? And that protection layer, because that's why we get that protection layer. The sun coming down, stopping us from getting too much vitamin D and blocking some of the UV rays, not all of them. People who are darker skin can absolutely burn, just like they can bruise and everything else underneath the sun, right? Yeah, it gives some block of the high sun content coming in. And in a time and a space where you're not getting a lot of shade and you don't have a place to go, right? You're so cute. Listen, telling truth is not blackwashing history. It is taking away the whitewash of history. It is taking away your idea that you're superior in some way, shape, or form because of the color of your skin. It is not telling you in any way, shape, or form that other people are superior because of the color of their skin. It is telling you the scientific fact of what the genetic advantage is, the thing that actually fucking helps us, okay? It is telling you the genetic advantage. It is not blackwashing jack shit. All coming from the continent of Africa is not blackwashing jack shit either. And I'm really weirded out by you guys telling me that, anything coming from Africa, blackwash shit. Africa has every color known to man on its continent pre-colonization. Current indigenous groups in Africa are as light as I am. Okay. And your concept that skin tone denotes superiority or inferiority is based on the theory of race that has been debunked. Again, racism is still way too prevalent in our system, that tells you that this indicates anything at a fucking deeper level other than life experience. And it doesn't. Okay. Now you can learn, you can open your mind, you can understand a few new things. You can understand how you got as light as you are. That's coming in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Okay. Or you can sit there and run your fucking mouth because you think you know everything without ever trying to know anything. I don't know everything. I don't want to know everything. There are areas that I won't even look at because why the fuck would I try and fill my brain with every fucking thing underneath the sun? But when you stop learning new things is when you start dying. You stop living. Because knowledge, that spark of understanding, that quest to know more, it is as innately us as nurture and communal is. It is why you went from fire and Homo erectus to a cell phone that you're on. And your decision to block it comes from the propaganda and the indoctrination of a nation state, of a capitalistic idea, of a stratified society to keep you down, to keep you under other people's control, and to ensure that you never rise up and take what you are due. And instead, you just give and give and give to somebody exploiting the holy fuck out of you. So you can sit there and run your mouth on it, but it's not blackwashing. It's telling you the absolute fucking truth. It may change tomorrow. We may have an entirely different truth tomorrow. And if we do, I'll come in and announce it. I was telling everybody 6 months ago that we came through speciation, through isolation, because that's what we knew as speciation. And 6 months ago, we realized that this theoretical method of speciation that I just described is how we came into being. Speciation through convergence. And I changed what I was saying because new information changes the subject. Facts are facts for now. They change tomorrow if something new comes along, which is, again, another brilliant fucking thing about us that comes from our quest of knowledge that took us from fire to a cell phone. So you are more than welcome to stay and listen. You're more than welcome to learn something because good goddess knows you really want to. Okay? It's your boredom that makes you an ass. Okay? Or you can scroll the fuck on. But you're not going to call science blackwashing history because I'm giving you the fucking truth and you have an issue with it. We, coming from species of convergence, moving into space, start adapting to that space. And the first things that we adapt to that space are going to be language, okay? Are going to be the understanding and are going to be tool usage. If I come from a space that, say, I use palm trees for my spears, palm trees can be flexible. So now I have to use something else for my spears because there's no palm trees around here. So maybe I find oak. Now, oak is really hard. So if I'm going to use oak for my spear, that using of oak for my spear, it might not be as easy, right? Like I might have a hard time using oak. Every time I hit something, it might shatter because I'm not used to it. It might not be as good as I need it to be. So now I have, or it might not work in the way I'm used to it working. So now I have to adapt the way I use my spear to utilize the trees in the area. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe I decide I need a different wood and I go out and I find a different wood and then I start using that wood for my spears, right? But I am adapting to the space that I am in. I'm adapting my understanding of space. In this comes language and our adaptation of how we understand things. Every being on this planet to the trees has language. They all communicate. The trees live in matriarchal clans and in forest that's a nation. Every forest that you see is a nation filled with matriarchal clans, and it's all intercommunicative. Okay, they're all talking to each other. And your cat and your dog, they talk to each other. Most beings talk to each other through pheromones and scents and things like that. Their communication levels are deeper than our communication level. The fact that you talk in words is not really a deep communication level. Many indigenous cultures understand that. And many indigenous cultures actually are still holding on to that, right? Even today, many indigenous cultures still use that deeper method of communication that is body language, that is, sensing what somebody is dealing with or sensing what is going on. And we call it sensing, right? Instead of realizing that we're reading things off of the air or off of the feel around us, right? Because scientifically, we're all energy, right? So when you're looking at becoming indigenous to space and your language is adapting into this space, as your language is adapting into this space, you're going to start utilizing words that explain the entirety of a thing, right? You're going to start becoming a part of the space, right? And so this is where we get things like eye bright, which is an herb that you use to flush your eyes when you have any infections in your eyes, right? Or feverfew, which is an herb that will lower your fever. This is where we change. Oh, you're so cute. Indigenous people knew quantum physics before you had a concept of science. Just so you're aware. I know that in your Western thought process, you think that you're the first with every single idea, but Indigenous science is 2 million years old, and Indigenous science was continuous, and your science was stolen from you by the church in 400, and you weren't allowed science or medicine for 1,000 years. And because you weren't allowed science or medicine for 1,000 years, you think it's all fucking new, but everybody had it before you had it. Everybody. We have medicine. We have full foot amputations that are better than full foot amputations we have today. And as somebody who did radiography, I've been in surgeries for that motherfucking shit. I will tell you, we have full foot amputation at 31,000 years ago in Borneo. The ancient Egyptians did plastic surgery and full hip and knee replacements. And y'all want to explain it away as fucking aliens because you can't understand the concept that your church stole from you. So when we're sinking into this indigenous space, we are able to adjust our language and adjust our tool usage and adjust the things that we are doing in this space to understand the space in a fuller manner. I'm going to describe this using an English thought process. But I want you to understand as I do that English is a bastardized language made up of 10 different languages at minimum, and nobody speaks it right in the United States at all. Okay, so in the US, up in the Pacific Northwest, where I grew up, where I currently live, we have about 20 different words for rain. And this is because I can sit in my living room and tell you what the rain is like outside so you know what you are needing to wear out. Right? You know how you're going to need to deal with it. And it's because in the Pacific Northwest, we have rain that comes in 20 different fucking categories. So if I'm sitting in my living room and I've walked outside to the car maybe, and I come back in and you're getting ready to leave, and you're like, is it raining out? I'm going to be able to tell you, yeah, it's kind of drizzly out. So you know you probably don't need anything. You might not even need to turn on your windshield wipers. Or I'm going to tell you, fuck, it's sleeting out. And you're going to go, oh, not sleeting, sheeting. Oh, well, shit, I better grab a hat so that rain's not on my glasses and take the raincoat, or the heavy coat, right? You are going to know by the verbiage I use for the word rain, what kind of rain you're interacting with so that you can, in an instant, know what to deal with, okay? Instead of, yeah, the rain's coming down kind of sideways today that we hear in Braveheart, I can tell you it's side misting, it's misty out, right? You conceptualize without having to have a broad sentence or paragraph spoken to you, right? In a singular word. Now, when you look at indigenous languages and how all of our languages develop, because all of our languages are rooted in indigenous language, how all of our language develops, we see that language develops, and especially becoming an indigenous to space language, right? And a language developing for the space develops telling you about all the different things within that space on a level that just a singular word can describe it to you. Just a singular phrase can describe it to you. So you see this with the herbology, because we are at 50,000 years ago absolutely using medicine. We see it in Neanderthals prior to that. So the herbology that we're using in the space and the weaponry that we're changing in the space. And we also see this in the way that we're decorating our body and that we're interacting and identifying ourselves. Now, if I lived along the Mediterranean basin and I came in contact with a lot of shells my entire life, I probably might be a people of the shell. I might be wearing a lot of shells, like the shell headdress on the Gervasian man from Europe 40,000 years ago behind me. This, taken from the goddess of Willendorf, shows that there are people who are using this kind of idea. So I might be decorating myself with shells. I'm a people of the shells. You know me as a people of the shells. But then I move into the mountains and there's no fucking shells anywhere around. There's a lot of red deer. And so now I start using deer teeth in my decoration. This is my adaptation to the food source in that space, to the ability to create identity within that space, to what I'm utilizing in that space. And now people, yeah, they don't play in here. I got good mods. And people are now identifying you as coming from the mountains because you wear deer teeth, right? Not only that, of course, your digestion and the way that you process food is adapting because you're going from something that's pretty oceanic or seafood based, right, to something that is a little bit more red meat based, right? So your body is adapting too, and we see those adaptations a lot of times in genes. So When we are becoming indigenous space and when we are adapting into space, this is a time that it's us and Neanderthals. Okay. This is a time when it's us and Neanderthals. By the time that we have enveloped Neanderthals fully within us and have become indigenous to the space in the lower part of Europe, we get to the Gravatians at 40,000 years ago. The Gravatians have settled into this space. They are indigenous to this space. They have different settlements that they're living in. They have different communities that they're a part of. To our understanding, currently, these communities are tribe communities because they are based on genetic lineage, though there is outside genetics coming in. So they are not solely based on genetic lineage. And this adaptation and understanding the niche and the fitting within this space has already settled. Now, the Neanderthals don't ever leave. We still have more Neanderthal DNA, or we now have more Neanderthal DNA on this planet than we did when they were a whole genome species of their own. So we have the Neanderthals within us, and we have probably the Neanderthals within our recent memory at this time frame even. It's maybe, if Neanderthals are died out by 40,000 years ago, it may only be a couple of generations since you've seen a Neanderthal, and maybe 10 generations since you've seen a Neanderthal, but it is still within memory. And it's also still within some of the features. We have hybridized children that we have found. It's also, still within the actions and the thought process. We're seeing their art still on caves, right? So Neanderthals are still a part of our memory at this point of time. Yet we are sinking into a space where we are now the only human. And this is the first time that we've been the only human. Up until this point, we have always had other humans, whether the other humans were our parents, the other humans were our cousins, or the other humans were somebody we were just meeting for first time who was a long lost family member. We have always had other humans, and this is the first time that we're starting to be just us. Now, during this time, as we're starting to be this just us, we are in a period where we're starting to see it's almost like we've got this connection to the world around us already because we are us, right? And we have identified the idea that other species are a part of us, like the animals and the planet and the herbs, they're all that intermixed. It takes all of us together as the biome, right? We're kind of at this point midway in our understanding of the idea of spirit, things like that. We've developed conscience of self. We developed the idea of you live on after you're dead because we're burying you for 50,000 years by this point. We start to see our first anamorphic things coming out at this point. Anamorphic means something that sees the human in the animal or the animal in the human, right? So 40,000 years ago is our first anamorphic statue that we've found so far. This is head of a lion and body of a man with some markings on the man's arms. And this is 40,000 years ago, and this is a Gravatian piece. This is the lower part of Eurasia. I don't remember the exact location. I'm kind of genetically challenged, or not genetically, genetically challenged, kind of geographically challenged. So this is in the lower part of Eurasia. This is a Gravatian thing. We start to see this, this interchange. This is the early Europeans, and the early Europeans are dark of skin. So this realization of the interchange of spirit of animal and man, right? It's not a set apart as a set above. It's not even really a set apart because it's seeing that you and I are the same. I no longer have other humans to be the same with, but now I'm looking at you and I are the same, right? Not that I ever thought that we were different, but now I'm seeing that you're just as human as I am, maybe. So we also see during this time frame, midway through this time frame, a couple of other things develop. Our earliest tattoo tooling that we have at this point of time, and this is, within the last 10 years, so we could push it back because we just realized that these were actually tattoo tools. We might find more of them. Somebody had found a flake, a discard flake, or what they thought was a discard flake. If I am flaking off or flint napping, I'm going to create this surface, and then to create this surface, I have to do a bunch of small flakes off to create the surface so that I can hit the surface and create a point. So it was thought to be a discard flake, and then they found a single point on it, and it has blood and pigment. This is 35,000 years ago in a cave in France. So this is our earliest tattooing implement that we currently have. We know that we have been tattooing since the Gravachians at 35,000 years ago. Okay. So the other things that we're seeing within this time frame are our start of our goddess statues that we know of today. Like all of the goddess statues really that we know of are found during this time period. The goddess of Willendorf wears the same kind of headdress that you see on the man behind me. The goddess of Brasomfi, it's hard to tell if hers is a long headdress or if it's braids. It's kind of hard to tell a little bit on the goddess of Willendorf if it's braids or not. I kind of agree with the headdress thought process because if it's braids, it comes down to here, and this is smaller than this, but it's all in a box braid almost pattern, like it's all braided in straight or not. It's all done in straight lines, right? So it looks a little bit more like it's a shell headdress than the goddess of Willendorf or Brasomfi. And the goddess of Brasomfi is long and it's like she's got bangs and then braids down to here. So there is a lot of concept that, or a lot of modern day concept that this could indicate something like a status or a space within society. Because these are often associated as fertility figurines, it's thought that this could be midwives, right? What the midwives were wearing so that you could tell who a midwife was. Um, I do not think that the statues represented actual women that died. I mean, absolutely, it could be what it is, right? Even the lion-headed man, right? That could actually be a man who has like he killed a mountain lion and he's wearing like a mountain lion helmet, right? Um, so they could all absolutely be funerary. I don't pronounce English right. Funerary sculptures, right? They could absolutely all be that. Uh, we don't know for certain, right? All of the things that we are kind of guessworking on as paleoanthropologists, right, are trying to decide, right, um, is that looks like, well, that could be. And for the longest time, because all the voices were European voices to decide these things instead of indigenous voices, um, as a global scale, a lot of times that concept didn't have all the different nuances of concept, right? So, like, um, and in people who are still able to hold on to their indigenous knowledge have a concept of the earth in a different way than Western thought has a concept of the earth, right? Because most animistic cultures, and not all indigenous cultures are animistic, but many are. Animistic cultures look at the biome as a whole, right? Whereas Western-based thought looks at the biome as a this and as a gift that was given to a this, right? And we're up here. And so when you're up here, and you don't understand the whole here, if you've separated yourself, it's kind of hard to see the concept of the whole as a many. Like I was in an argument recently with somebody who was trying to tell me what I was thinking, which is always fun. But they were trying to tell me that my concept of community as a whole means one or singularity. And I was like, well, one, yes, but one of many. Like it's never a singular. And they were trying to tell me, well, and they were white explaining to me that indigenous people thought that whole means singular. And I was like, that is not what any indigenous person I've ever thought or met thought. But okay. But the concept of many making the whole, right? And so there's a different concept for animistic cultures of what the biome means and how interaction as an indigenous or animistic person within the biome is. Versus the Western thought that owns the biome, right? And separates, it kills the biome, thinks that the biome is a dead thing that it can destroy, right? And so as we're getting more people who are indigenous specifically at this point into or in this concept indigenous into the area, they're able to point out things that are more of a whole biome or animistic sense that might apply better. And so you have groups that are still thinking in a very Western thought process, within the community of anthropology and archaeology, and groups that are still thinking in a very are well, they're still thinking because they've always thought like that, but they're thinking in and introducing to these people the concept that's very old, that there is a hole here. And so this understanding switches what this understanding is, but these different groups are still kind of going, well, I think mine's right because I think I'm right, and other people are going, well, I think I'm right. So there's many different concepts of what these different things can mean. Headdressing and the what the statues means is one of those things, that it can mean many different concepts, right? um, Personally, I think that I personally see it as about a concept of the biome as a whole, right? I think that it is really about that interaction, and about identity of space within community, what space you fulfill within community. Um, Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be something that was created after somebody died to remember them with. It could absolutely be. Um, we haven't seen a lot of evidence of like statuary of people who are dead or anything associated with dead people, right? So that kind of like that would be something that we would need to have evidence of to take that thought process to a next step, right? But it's a possibility. So when we're sinking into the space and we're adapting into the space and all of these different concepts and all of these different ways of being, our artwork, our tool usage, our language, our herbs, our medicine, what we're eating, all of these things are adapting into this space and sinking into this space. These are the first things that adapt, because these are the things that we as human beings understand and do really, really fucking good at. Okay. And B, things that we must do first so that we can live within the space to get to any other level of adaptation. Now, most adaptations take 100 generations. This currently is 2,500 years. That does not mean, like, say, in the case of skin, that you're going from very dark or high concentration of melanin to very light or low concentration of melanin in 100 generations. It means you're going from very dark or high concentration of melanin to slightly lighter or slightly less concentration of melanin in 100 generations, and slightly less in another 100 generations, and slightly less in another 100 generations. Now, again, like everything in this world, that fluctuates depending, right? Not everybody follows any direct line. The idea that anybody can achieve any idea of normal or perfect or any of those thought processes is a very Western thought. It's not possible, and it's actually kind of harmful. So maybe that generation is 33 years, or maybe that generation is, maybe it takes a dozen more, or maybe it takes a dozen less, right? So when we're looking at the groups of people as they're adapting their body, the first things that they're adapting in their body are going to be their digestion, the way that they're able to interact with the food in the area. Then they're going to be adapting to the weather, right? So we're first going to see that the low sunlight adaptation, or the low sunlight in the European continent, adapts our eyes. This is because our eyes have melanin in it, just like everything else in our body has melanin in it. And the melanin keeps some of the sun out. Where we see it as a species, it's very sunny. And you need dark eyes where it's very sunny, some of the sun out so you're not blinded by the sun. Keep your Bible out of my chat. Keep your Bible out of my chat. I don't deal with your God. He's a narcissist. He's nasty. He harms you, and he teaches you to harm others. Keep your God out of my chat. And your God has nowhere in reality. Your God has nothing to do with reality except to you. So trying to debate me based on what your God says, that narcissistic warmonger who likes to kill children and rape children, probably shouldn't have said that, it's TikTok. Keep him out of my chat. Okay, so not the person to argue with me on it. When we're adapting, the first thing that we see that it adapts is our eyes. And this is because as we lose the melanin condension in our eyes, we allow more light into our eyes. And by allowing more light into our eyes, we're better able to see in a low light environment. We need to be able to see the predators first. We need to be able to see that which is going to directly kill us before we need to get better vitamin D. Okay. And so we see that the low light adapts our eyes first. We start to get lighter eyes first. This is something that we have also seen in Neanderthals, that Neanderthals have lighter eyes. They also have lighter skin, and we know this. It should be understood really quick here that lighter skin in Neanderthal doesn't mean that all Neanderthals are white. It means that Neanderthals are in a lighter range, right? And sapien is on a darker range. Not all sapien is this shade of dark, right? They're on a range, right? So first, it needs to be understand that's a range. And the other thing that I want you to understand is that there are specific alleles for light skin versus dark skin in Homo sapiens and specific alleles for light skin versus dark skin in Neanderthals. And you can have the dark skin allele for Neanderthal and the light skin allele for Homo sapien and have either one of these pop up as what everybody sees. Okay. Because there is a dark and a light skin allele for Neanderthal and or range, because they're all in ranges. There's like 9 alleles, right? Dark and light skin alleles for Neanderthal and dark and light skin alleles for Homo sapien. So we start to see that the eyes are changing first and that the eyes are getting lighter first. By 10,000 years ago, we are now, of course, out of the Gravatian period. We have gone another 100 or another 20,000 years or 30, 10, 20, yeah, 20,000 years. I don't maths either. So going to 10,000 years ago, we see that we have light eyes and dark skin still. We see Chatterman at 10,000 years ago is dark of skin. The alleles are defined by science as sub-Saharan African alleles for his skin tone. And because each allele is defined by a space, basically, or where they think. So, and his eyes are blue. His direct descendant, his 300th generation great grandson, is in that area, very light of skin with blue eyes. Yet Chatterman was very dark of skin with blue eyes. Even Otzi at 5,000 years ago or 300 or 3000 BCE is still, the alleles are defined as being Middle Eastern brown is basically what they're defined as. So we're looking at something that is not light. It's actually relatively dark compared to what you would think of currently today in that region. We do not see that light skin really becomes predominant. And again, lighter. And again, I want, or no, not again, but I do want to define by predominant. We're looking at like 51% of the population. We're not looking at 85% of the population. We're seeing it like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. We're starting to see lighter skin becoming more predominant within a population in the northwestern part of Europe. Okay, so we are not seeing that light skin is really a predominant thing within society until much later. So when we are moving into Europe, when we are settling in and becoming indigenous to space in Europe, we're settling in and becoming indigenous to space and adapting in that space from who we were when we were living and created and spending 100,000 years within Africa and within what we currently call the Levant and the Arabian Peninsula, though they were a part of Africa and attached at this time. So our first adaptations to space have to do with understanding the space. And then our next adaptations to space have to do with defense. And then our next adaptation to space, that adaptation that comes with needing to have better access to vitamin D, comes much later. There are many things that we can get vitamin D from as well. And it needs to be understood, must be understood, that adaptation, that ability to adapt, that is the fantastic things about humans that allows our species to move across the planet and become indigenous to space in different spaces across the planet, along with our expedient bipedalism. It is not having light skin that is a genetic advantage. In fact, light skin is a genetic disadvantage compared to dark skin. Dark skin will protect you in more spaces than light skin will. Dark skin will protect you from the sun in more spaces than light skin will. Okay. And light skin will not work in many places that dark skin does. If you take light skin into a region that has a high sun level, you are going to end up probably burnt at a quick pace. And it will also cause other levels of problems within your body because you're too exposed to that overdose of vitamin D. Okay. You can't stop the overdose. You can gain more by eating different things, but you can't stop the overdose, right? So I have seen thought processes that talk about, or I've seen studies that talk about the possibility that light skin actually retains heat better. I have not seen anything that states anything about producing more vitamin D. And again, we can get more vitamin D from the native, from the world around us, right? We can find more vitamin D in different spaces or different foods that we're eating, right? So, but I've not seen anything that states anything about it producing vitamin D. Now, that doesn't mean it's not true. It just means I haven't seen anything that states that. What I have seen is that it states that there is concept. We do know that like the epidermis, your skin, right, is the largest organ of your body. And the more of it that you have, the easier it is to dissipate heat. And the less of it you have, the easier it is to retain heat. This is why sapien develops tall and long and Neanderthal develops short and stocky, right? Um, so we do know that the skin itself will help retain and dissipate heat. Recent studies have shown that having lighter skin will actually help retain heat more. So this could be a possibility of why the Neanderthals also developed, or how the Neanderthal speciated with lighter skin. And another reason that we do get lighter skin is that in colder environments, it might help with heat more. I've only seen like one paper on it, so I don't know like the vastness of the understanding of that yet. And so, like, yes, but that could change tomorrow. It could be something else, right? So, um, when we are during this time period from 40,000 to 30,000 years ago, we have not adapted our skin tone or our eye tone in these spaces yet. We are still in the process of adapting our language, our foods, our behavioral patterns, our identity. All of these things are what, yeah, I can do that, Andrew. All of these things are what we're seeing within the adaptation during this time period of 10,000 years. Ghost DNAs, I can touch on those really quick. So we all know that there are people that have Neanderthal DNA in them and people that have Denisovan DNA in them. Neanderthal and Denisovan, what we're seeing is just little strands of DNA, like little genetic pieces or fingerprints or parts, right? This gene from this and this gene from that. We have what we call ghost species in our DNA as well. We don't just have Neanderthal and Denisovan. Neanderthal and Denisovan are two that we have the full genome of in the fossil record because we've been able to DNA test fossils and get their DNA. And so we know what their whole genome's like, so we can look and go, oh, this matches this. So we have genes within our genome that are absolutely human genes. Absolutely, just like Neanderthal and Denisovan are human genes, absolutely human genes from the genus human within our DNA that we have not found the whole genome of the species in the fossil record yet. And so we call these ghost species. They're species that we have a couple of genes of within our DNA, but we haven't identified the species that they come from. We absolutely know that they're terrestrial. We absolutely know that they're human. We absolutely know that they come from the genus human. We haven't found the species. So uh, we have currently, that I know of, 7 ghost species. Now, the seventh one is a new one. It came out like 2 months ago with the new species that came out 2 months ago because there's a new species that came out 2 months ago. We haven't named it yet. Currently, it's just HLD6. It's in China, I think. It's in an Asian country. I think it is in China, but I don't want to be wrong on that. And it looks close to us. Like it's the first other species that we're starting to see. There's a remnant of a chin starting, and they're flat faced, right? There's some significant differences still. There's gaps and skull, but they're very close to us. And this is 300,000 years ago. And this is China, and this came out 2 months ago. When this article or this paper is coming out, there's a new ghost species in that paper. And I don't know where we see that new ghost species in the DNA of Homo sapiens yet. The reason being that I haven't, like, it didn't announce in the paper which space actually has that ghost species. We have that making our 7th, we have 6 other ghost species. One of the other ghost species, we see that species in Neanderthal and Denisovan, but we don't see it in us. And then of the 5 ghost species that we see in us, We see them in specific populations around the world. In Africa, everybody has Neanderthal DNA from that time of the Levant area and everybody moving back in. This is a pre-colonization find knowledge. So they've tested people remains from pre-colonization and found Neanderthal DNA within them, with the exception of two populations in Africa. The two populations in Africa that do not have Neanderthal DNA are the Yoruba population of West Africa and the Kwe population of South Africa. Those two populations that do not have Neanderthal DNA with them have three of those ghost species. Again, that is the Yoruba population of West Africa and the Kwe population of South Africa. And yes, that is the correct. I've been told by people who are Kwe that they consider that to be a slur. And so they would refer that we don't use that terminology unless we can correctly pronounce it, which involves many clicks, and I don't click. Unfortunately, I have not been able to do that. A lot of things like that are things that you have to grow up being able to speak them, to be able to do them. Like I can roll my R's because I grew up rolling my R's, and a lot of people can't, yet I can't do the clicks. And so I'm not going to try and pronounce it because the pronunciation in English is considered to be a slur. And I was told that Kwe is the best way to say it, so that I'm not being offensive, right? So with those, we have those two populations, the Yoruba and the Kwe, that have no Neanderthal. They're the only two populations on the planet that do not have Neanderthal DNA, and they have three ghost species DNA within them. The Kwe actually is considered to be our original population from the whole genome thing, the whole genome project. When the whole genome project tested multiple people and was able to debunk the theory of race, in this debunction, they can also trace who has the highest concentration of all of the genetics of our species. And the Kwe people have all the genetics of Homo sapiens. Every single gene that you can possibly find in Homo sapien is found in the Kwe people. And so they're considered to be our oldest population, right? Because they have all the genes, right? And they're extremely genetically diverse. This is how we debunk the theory of race. You can be a primary population. You're more diverse within your primary population than you are between populations, meaning that you are more genetically diverse from your next door neighbor in a primary population than you are from somebody in a secondary primary population, meaning you are more likely to share genes with somebody in a different population than you are within your next door neighbor. Because, and this is really huge and important, and you'll understand this logically, we don't want to inbreed, right? When you lower your genetic diversity, when you narrow your genetic diversity, we become inbred. So you want your primary populations to be extremely genetically diverse. The other ghost species that we have are in Turtle Island and Abiyala. There's one in Turtle Islanders and Abiyalians who are indigenous, and in indigenous Australians, there is a ghost species there. In Australia, there is a Moyhill site that's 120,000 years old. This would be a descendant species of Homo erectus. This would relate to the ghost species that we see in indigenous Australians. And in Turtle Island, North America, for those who do not know, and Abiyala is South America, for those who do not know, there are three sites in Turtle Island itself that predate sapien being, well, one predates sapien. There is a site at Heoloka is there's three datings on Heoloka. One is 50,000, one is 250,000, and one is 800,000 years ago. So Heoloka has been around for an extensive period of time. The Ceruti Mastodon site, the date on the Ceruti Mastodon site is 130,000 years ago. And then there's another one that's 80,000 years ago. And I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it is on my website under Rewriting the Western Hemisphere. So these are descendant species of Homo erectus, and they correlate with the ghost species that we see in Turtle Islander indigenous people and Abiyalian indigenous people. So okay. And it's this website right here, the Widda Ord.com. Okay, so I'm getting out of here at 10:30. I'm going to change everything up probably about 10 o'clock because I have stuff that I go over at the end of all of my lives. And so I'll probably change it all up around 10 o'clock. And just so you're all aware, as you sit here, it is 9:35 for me now. As we are becoming indigenous to spaces, we're settling in. We've adapted all of these different languages. We've adapted our different languages. We've adapted our foods. We've adapted our tool usage. We've adapted our identity. We're adapting our clothing usage. We see that the first evidences that we have of tailored clothing, not meaning you took it down to the tailor and he made it fit your body like a glove, but meaning it's not tied around you, like thrown over you and tied around you. It's actually like sewn so that it somewhat fits your body so that you don't have a lot of air moving through. You're not getting colder. We find those at 40,000 years ago. And it's like a hip bone of an animal that has like all marks on it. We start to see actually that there's writing it right at 27,000 years ago in cave walls. And so just after the Gravation period, we actually start to see symbolism writing within the cave art that we see. We do see some evidence that Neanderthal actually had symbolism in writing as well. So it's something that will go back to 50,000 years ago. When these adaptations are happening and this sinking in, this is a time, again, when we are still very animistic. We are starting to see that you and I are, Homo sapien is the only human left on the planet, right? We're no longer with other humans, right? It's just us as humans. And so we're starting to see the animals around us. We never really saw them as separate from us. Like we never really seem to have seen them as us being set above and them being set below. An animistic thought process doesn't see us above and us them below. We're seeing us a little bit more like this, right? Now we're starting to see that by eating, by taking in, we can start to imbue the spirit. This is the start of thought process of spirituality. That's a really important thought process, Mother. Let's go ahead and touch on that. Nobody's saying that you have African DNA. You don't have African descendancy currently. And when we look at our DNA, we're not looking back 40,000 years unless we're looking at matching our DNA to archaeological sites, which you can do. You can match I've matched my DNA to archaeological sites. There's websites, and those are on my website too, that you can use to match your DNA to archaeological sites. When we are talking about your DNA and when you're looking at your DNA, you're not going back, God, 40,000 years. It's got to be like 4,000 generations. You're not going back. That's probably not right. It's probably 2,000 generations, but you're not going back that far. When you're looking at your DNA, you're looking at your DNA within the last 100 years. You're not looking at your DNA and seeing anything further back. And when they're looking at your DNA and they're comparing you to regions currently populated, they're comparing you to the DNA of the peoples in those regions currently populated. So they're not comparing your DNA to the DNA of people in Africa 40,000 years ago or people in Europe 40,000 years ago. They're comparing your DNA to the current populations of those areas. So, you are not African being Scottish, right? Those are distinct. And Africa is a continent. You're no more African than you are European, right? Because you're Scottish, which is a specific nationality, in Africa is a whole fucking continent with about 100 different nationalities, right? So you're no more of an African country than you are of Britain, right? Other than the fact that, it's still under Great Britain, fuck Great Britain, right? So, yes, you're right. Yet that does not mean that Homo sapien doesn't start in Africa. And it does not mean that they don't all start dark. And it does not mean that the first people on the island of Britain weren't this dark. Because all genetic and scientific evidence tells us that the people of the island of Britain from the very start, and the people who are the direct ancestors of many people on the island of Britain, were this dark. Right? So we are talking about a time period before your modern sense of time. We're talking about a time period 30,000 years, 40,000 years before Celt exists. Okay. We're not talking about modern day thought process, though it is absolutely important to understand that at 10,000 years ago, the first people on the island of Britain are dark of skin, very dark of skin, right? So that's very important to understand. Mm, So the Moor is actually a slur. That word is actually a slur. And that group of people was a mixture. It was it was Muslims that came from the Middle East and North Africa and invaded the Iberian Peninsula. The group is Muslim, right? Which is where the word Moor, which is again a slur, and those who are of that region and those who are of that descendancy would be really offended. Um, it is a group that is made up of many different skin tones. The Amazi are the Tamazi people, who you might know as the Berbers of North Africa, are very light, right? Uh, and that is pre-colonization, right? As Neil deGrasse Tyson will tell you, there is every single color of skin that you can possibly get on the continent of Africa. Africa is a broadly genetically diverse region, and that is prior to colonization. So, um, actually, two white parents can absolutely have a black child. Look up the Sandra Lang case. Two very white parents had a very, well, I guess she was more along their terms because it was during apartheid. She was not considered black, she was considered colored during apartheid. But you can look up the Sandra Lang case, and the Sandra Lang case is a case of two very white parents having a black child. I actually knew somebody in my 20s who was a very white woman who had a very white ex-husband who had to do a DNA test when their black daughter was born. So you can absolutely, her case wasn't famous. Sandra Lang's case is famous, so I can point you there so you can go and look it up and you can actually Google and see, right? But it does happen, absolutely. So with the Gravations, we start to see that animistic understanding. Of course, we've always had that animistic understanding. That animistic understanding deepens into this concept of being able to see ourselves in them, because we can no longer see ourselves in other humans, right? There are no longer other humans to see ourselves in, so we can now see the animals in ourselves and ourselves in the animals. Our oldest languages come from the interaction of the planet around us. So from the beginning, we looked at the animals as people that we can communicate with, other people, right? Other beings that are on the same level of understanding on a lot of levels. So with the understanding that our oldest languages comes from the sounds of the world around us, right? Comes from an interaction of, understanding speech as a broader scale, right? And utilizing speech in the same method that the world around us is utilizing speech, right? Because animals speak, they have verbal, there's absolutely more scent and more energy and more body language involvement in their communication than there is with us, right? Yet they have that verbal ability to verbalize. We may not understand what they're verbalizing, but they definitely are verbalizing. So our earliest verbalizations are mimicking this. And so we see that our oldest languages still show record of that, still show record of hearing the world around us and interacting. And so we can assume that at this time, the languages that we're hearing, the languages that are speaking, are also adjusting to the sounds of the world around them. So if you're moving into a space where you have a different bird that might make a different click or a different trill, you might adapt that into your language. And so we're starting to see these language divisions within these spaces. Of course, language divisions are already happening in other spaces, right? Because this is going to happen wherever you're feeling this, right? Wherever you're hearing different sounds. So these language divisions are coming out and they're spreading into different spaces and sinking down. These divisions of language also identifying, as we were going over, the different herbs in the space, the different animals in the space. You might come across animals you've never seen before, and now you have to describe what this animal is. How do you describe what this animal is? You say what this animal is. That word comes to mean the fullness of what this animal is, right? So this concept that we've already got, that we're just a part of, right? That has broadened in our understanding of art because we're doing cave paintings, right? and deepens now into this understanding of the statuary and the deeper arts that we're doing, also gives us these senses of identity and also gives us these different ways of interacting with the world. So, because we have an understanding of medicine and how the herbs are going to interact with our body and help with our body, and because we have an understanding of the different animals and plant life's interactions on other levels, like what are we using for basketry, because we are using all of these tools. They biodegrade really fast, so we don't find them in the fossil record, but we've been using tools like basketry and bags and things like that for a long period of time. So, um, as our language is broadening to include all of these things, and this becomes a part of this whole, right? And the way that these things intermesh with us becomes a deeper understanding, and our space within this intermesh becomes a deeper understanding, and our sense of identity within a community that has a space within this intermesh, right? What do I bring to the table has a deeper understanding. This really takes our level of self-decoration up a few notches, right? It really takes our level of identifying me to you up. And it also takes our level of the way that we're understanding the body and our understanding of it just kind of takes all of our concepts up a notch, right? We get more spiritual as we would understand spiritual. We get more sometimes it's hard to find words that describe it in a fullness, right? We become more aware of what we bring to the table, of how we bring to the table, and of how to interact those things. So we start to see people who are, well, and we may have seen these earlier, but we really start to see people who are devoted to things like I heal, or I hunt, or I sew, or I flint knap, right? We start to see art becoming art for art's sake, right? I art, right? And we start to see that deepen, and we start to see that intermix. And this is where, if you're looking to connect to European ancestry, if you're looking to connect to your, if you're looking to deeper, and again, this is all about appropriation versus appreciation versus finding your own culture. If you're looking to find your own culture versus appropriate another person's culture, this is the deepest that you're going to go. Does that make sense? Like, this is the foundation of the cultures that come out of Europe afterwards. So this is that unified sense. So what you see within here is going to spread out to other European cultures afterwards, right? The way that the interaction of the herbs within the biome is something that's going to be carried down until Europe loses science at 400. The medicine is going to be carried down and built upon until Europe loses that in 400, right? The understanding of how you imbue a spirit of an animal, or how that animal might take your spirit, that understanding of deity archetypes, that understanding of what is important in this environment. This is the foundation of all of that. This is where this foundation starts. And this is where you can, if you're tracing it back, this is almost as far as you can go, right? So when we're looking at the understanding of things that are done in an animistic sense today, so first it should be understand that indigenous does not mean animistic, right? Not all indigenous cultures are animistic cultures. I haven't met any that aren't, yet I would never monotheize anything or mono anything, right? So I know that there must be some out there that aren't, right? So indigeneity and animism are often very intertwined, because of the fact that for many indigenous cultures, it is about being a part of the biome and belonging to the land there. And animism thinks of being a part of the biome and belonging to the land there. Okay. So I want it understood that being indigenous does not necessarily mean being animistic, right? Mainly because I don't want you to think that you know what all indigenous cultures are like. I don't want to think I know what all indigenous cultures are like. I may know many. That doesn't mean I know all, right? So um, you can, though, look within animism and see that animism carries many of the same practices wherever it's practiced across the globe. And so we're going to look at this as an animistic sense instead of looking at it as an indigenous sense. So the practices that we see that animism carries with it, the practices that we can take back far, that we can dig into and see, are interactions with herbs, and the belief that that interaction with herb is not just about what you take in your body, but about what you use around you, and how that interaction with herb and use around you affects your body and affects your entirety of your biome. Interaction with animals and the understanding of animalistic spirit, the understanding of, animism is the title mainly because it just believes that we're another animal in the biome. But that interaction, the biome that interacts with other animals, right? It should be important to note that most people don't, that are animistic, don't think that like, I don't think I gave birth to my dog, right? Um, I recognize my dog as a living, breathing human being deserving of respect that is my equal. And because I've been given care of my dog, I call him, I'm like, I'm his mom, but it doesn't mean that I think that like we're the same. It means that I recognize that this animal is my equal in many ways. He's got a conscience. He is highly intelligent, like, and I treat him with the same respect and love that I would treat another family member because I owe responsibility to him because I chose to take that responsibility on. And they stay at a toddler level for their entire fucking lives. So many times he is a child, right? So when people are talking about being related to the animals, they're not talking about it as in, I think I gave birth to my dog, right? They're looking at the fact that there is an equality. We all fit our specific space within the niche, and the animals have their specific space within the niche that they're supposed to fulfill, right? So um, I want that one understood because a lot of people will misunderstand that, and I want that to be clarified. When you're looking at imbibing the spirit of an animal or taking on the spirit of an animal. This is something that we see in a lot of animistic cultures. And this is something that we can see as far back as the lion-headed statue, very possibly, right? This anamorphic idea is the idea that the spirit of the human and the spirit of the animal are intertwined, right? And in this understanding, this goes through into the things that you eat. It goes into the things that you, like if you're eating any form of meat, then this is the spirit of the animal. If you're eating any form of vegetable, that vegetable can hear you eat it. So you should also be doing the same respectful things to that, right? So part of this interaction is ensuring that the respect is shown for that animal. Now, you probably live in a city or you probably live in a space where you have to go down to the grocery store and get your meat. So you do not know how that animal was taken care of. And you most likely do not hunt. There might be a few of us out there who, I've hunted all my life, but many of us don't, right? So you most likely are not out there hunting for your meat either, which means that you're not able to tell whether or not your meat has lived a healthy life. And you know that your meat probably hasn't lived a healthy life. So how do you deal with that? Understanding that the things that you're imbibing into your body, the things that you're taking part of, they're bringing that spirit in. And here's something that was treated shitty. Yeah, kosher meat is one thing. And if you go to a butcher, like if you have a local butcher, but a lot of times those things cost more and most of us are flat ass broke, right? So if you are having to go down to the grocery store and buy your food and you're sitting here going, I don't know how this animal lived, or I'm sure that this animal had a bad life, and I don't want to disrespect my food. I want to show some respect or some love to this animal because before I imbibe it into my body, I want to make sure that it's coming in a positive way. I personally, I talk to it, right? As I am preparing my food, as I'm preparing my vegetables and my meat, if I have a piece of meat, I might sit there as I'm preparing it and talk to it and tell it, I know that you probably didn't have the best life. I hope that your spirit on the other side is doing much better, right? I hope that you're able to have the joy in the next life that you didn't get into here, right? And it does. It releases toxins in the body. Most things that you taste game in is because of the way that they were treated or the way that they were killed. If you taste game in something, what they call gamey, it's because of the way it's treated or the way it's killed or the way it's been butchered out after death, right? And so you might speak to that meat, and in that speak to the soul of the animal, the spirit of the animal that you're then going to imbibe when you're imbibing that meat, take in when you're taking in that meat, right? So that you can maybe give it a little bit of rest, right? Maybe give it a little bit of love that it did not have, right? And taking that meat in, take it in a healthier way, right? So this is a way that you can do a get around with a society that is hard with this, right? Um, and one other that I bring up frequently is smoke cleansing. Smoke cleansing is an animistic thought process that's really global. How you smoke cleanse is the difference. Um, if you are looking at, if your ancestry is European and you are trying to connect smoke cleansing to the European, right? You can look at the herbs that are indigenous to different places in Europe. So if you know that your people are from France, the areas in France, and they've been there forever, you might look to lavender. That's a very indigenous plant in France, right? Rose is one of those things that's pretty global. So you can pretty much do rose as a smoke cleansing and find maybe you're looking for roses that are actually indigenous to France, right? Or you can, go for wild roses, right? Um, Another thing that is pretty global is there is different forms of sage in every continent and different forms of sage in every space. You can get European sage and burn European sage. Stay away from white sage. White sage is something that is closed practice for many nations along the Western seaboard in the United States. So you can get different forms of European sage and burn that. You can put these things in many different things to do so. If you want to go deep into your past and not a little bit more modern, you can find shells, right? There are many different forms of shells out there. Now, abalone is a global thing. Yet you might feel like if I use abalone, I'm going to feel like I'm appropriating culture because I know indigenous people in Turtle Island use it, right? So you may not want to use abalone. There are other shells that you can use. Usually when you're smoke cleansing, you're not smoke cleansing with a whole bunch of stuff anyways. You could get even a little clam shell, right? Maybe you know that your family line is from Italy, and so you get some shells from Italy, some clam shells from Italy, and you have them shipped to you, and you cleanse them. And you can do that by burying them in salt or setting them out underneath the moon. There are different ways that you can do those things that are very interactive with the environment around you way to do them. So you can do also stones. If you are out and you find a really pretty rock that you like that's kind of broad and flat, this one's a little bit small for what I do, but you might do that, right? Metals are something that go back pretty far, not Gravatian far, but pretty far. So maybe you go out and you find something that you like that's like this and you use this, right? Iron is one of our earliest things that we're using as a metal. And iron is something that is pretty cross-cultural as a connection to the gods in cultures that have gods. There are many indigenous cultures for whom iron is a requirement, actually. And so there are not Turtle Island indigenous cultures, but other cultures around the world. So you can absolutely utilize iron in spaces where iron was being utilized when iron starts getting utilized. Another thing that you can do is glass is a relatively later invention, yet you can go and get glass that is shaped into a shell that reminds you of a shell from Italy. And so you're like, okay, well, this is my shell, right? So there are many different ways that you can put it into something that actually is capable of giving you the ability to burn your smoke, right? To burn the cleansing elements, right? That make you feel right. In all of these things, what sings to you is the right thing to do. In all of these things, when you do it, if it feels right, it's what you're supposed to do. If it feels icky, if it feels wrong, if it feels like when I was talking with the abalone, if it feels weird to you to use in Turtle Island indigenous abalone because you relate it to Turtle Island indigenous people and you feel like that would make you appropriating culture, don't do it. Find something else. If this something else feels weird to you, don't use that one. Go and find something else. It's about a quest. It's about a quest for the connection, because the connection that you're looking for is to your ancestors. And when it starts to sing to you, when you can touch it and hold it and feel it, and it goes, oh, that's me. right? Your ancestors are going to go, oh, that's me. I recognize that. I hear that. I feel that. So when it sings to you, utilize it. When it doesn't sing to you, set it aside and get something else. Um, and again, I went over a couple of different herbs, but if you know where your ancestors got here from, right? If you're in a diaspora and you know that your ancestors are from the Iberian Peninsula, or you know that your ancestors are from the island of Britain, you can go online, okay? And you can Google what are native plants, what are indigenous plants to those regions. And as you're going through them, you can get a list. That one smells good. I know that one smells good. When that one looks like it might work. Now you might want to go and compare that to what those herbs do. Make sure that you're not burning something that's poisonous to burn, right? Um, Yet you can go and look and use your brain, use your questioning and for knowledge, right? And pick out which ones speak to you and compare them, right? And find out, right? What do you do if you're a mutt? I am. There's not a continent on this. I'm everywhere. My genes come from everywhere. The whole map lights up. The whole globe lights up. Um, I don't usually like I'll share my altar sometimes or I'll show things like that. I don't usually tell people to worship in the ways that I worship because of the fact that I am so globally mixed that some of them I can identify where they come from. I have abalone shells because I was raised with abalone smoke cleansing, right? So I have that, and I have a couple of Turtle Island indigenous things on my altar, and I have a couple of Scandinavian things on my altar, and I have a couple of Celtic things on my altar, right? So I don't usually teach people because I don't teach people specifics because of the fact that my specifics are so multicultural. What you do when you're from everywhere is you use it all. Anything that sings, anything that speaks, anything that reaches out, anything that your ancestors recognize when you use it, right? So if you come from multiple places on the globe, you might smoke cleanse with 5 different things. Like I smoke cleanse with cedar and sage and sweetgrass and rose. And sometimes I'll toss in some lavender, right? And cedar is something that is in many different cultures across the globe, but I come from the Pacific Northwest. Sage, the sage that I have was given to me by LaDonna Allard in Standing Rock. And so I have a little bit of that left, and that's the sage that I use. And then I still have a sweetgrass braid that my mother gave me decades ago that I take a little strand from and I crumple up. So you can use whatever different things connect to you, whatever different things speak to you. And when you're multicultural and multi regional origin, right, you're going to have 1,000 different things that speak to you, right? Mm. It is hard when you are multi everything. It is hard to find a place to belong, right? That is very hard. It's very hard. So that's a good way to smoke cleanse. And I've gone over imbuing animals. Um, or eating animals. Um, you can also use things like uh, feathers. In the United States and Canada, I know for certain in the United States, you cannot use any bird of prey feather unless you are an enrolled member of an indigenous nation. Um, this is federally law, right? So if you have any birds of prey feathers, you need to be an enrolled member. You can use other feathers though. Maybe you found a beautiful feather when you were out and about, right? Um, you can decorate yourself with feathers. You need to stay away from specific patterns. War bonnets are war bonnets. They're about like it's a medal, it's an honor. You don't wear that unless you've earned it, right? So definitely don't be trying to look like you're wearing a war bonnet, right? Yet you can wear feathers on your clothes or wear feathers in a necklace or wear feathers out of your ears or braid a feather into your hair. Again, you have to make sure that you're not using any bird of prey feathers. These things are illegal, right? Rightly so. Rightly so. There are things that had to be federally protected because otherwise the indigenous nations were not having their rights protected, right? So, rightfully so, it is illegal for you to use them. So you can uh, absolutely use other feathers in your decoration of self, Make sure that you're not using patterns that are associated with Turtle Island Indigenous people. We were talking yesterday about appropriation versus appreciation, and that's the last thing that I'm going to touch on tying into this before I go into my end of live spiel. Appropriation versus appreciation is an extremely important difference. You can appreciate a culture by buying created goods from Indigenous people, from Black people, and wearing and utilizing those goods. I'm Indigenous, so only part of this matters for me, right? But if I was not Indigenous and I was to buy these earrings that were created by a friend of mine, that's Bernie Sanders in the center. These are Makwa's creations, and I can give people their information. That's Bernie Sanders in the center at the inauguration. The surrounding, this is a medallion earring. It's a Turtle Island Indigenous design. This is sweetgrass around the outside. This is a sweetgrass braid, and they put a bunch of different beads around, right? And it's got some leather on the back. You can absolutely buy from an Indigenous creator and wear that earring. This is an earring that I've made. I actually owe these earrings to a person, a sister of mine. This is a red dress with dentilium, and it's a jingle dress. And if you do not know MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, we are at a crisis. 26% per capita of our women go missing or murdered every year. The red dress is worn to kind of bring awareness and also to kind of make sure that our people know that we're still fighting for them, right? Even though they're gone. If you have a Indigenous creator that you know who makes red dresses and you want to buy a pair of red dresses from them so you can wear those red dresses so that you can bring that knowledge forth and so that you can make sure that people are aware of this extremely horrific tragedy going on. I mean, we are the lowest population in the US as it is, and then 26% of that population goes missing every year through tragedy. I lost 2 sisters through this, right? So if you want to do that, you're more than welcome. What you cannot do if you are not an Indigenous person to Turtle Island, if this is not your space or your nation, create something that is a Turtle Island Indigenous design and sell that. That is appropriation. So appreciation would be buying something like this off of an Indigenous creator and making sure, have a great one. Mimi, I see some stuff at the end. My lives are always over on YouTube as well, so you can watch them there. And then I have something, I've actually got a pin. There's a pinned video on my thing that you should watch, which is what I'm going to say next after we talk about this, if you want to hear it. So buying something from an Indigenous creator that gives that Indigenous creator better ability to live in a world that is kind of fucked up right now, right? In cases like this, that brings support to an Indigenous cause that is necessary to be supportive of, right? I have Black siblings, and I have one who was doing hair and learning how to do hair, and she put my hair in box braids because she was like, I really need to do straight hair. I need to figure out how to do it. And I went, okay, I'll be a test dummy. I'm going to feel really uncomfortable walking around in this because people are going to think the wrong thing, but that is not appropriation. That was doing something for my sibling. She needed that. Buying box braids from somebody who is doing box braids and supporting them, that's not appropriation. If you're going to go out and start doing box braids on yourself and sell them, that is appropriation. If you're going to go out and create designs, these are Native American inspired designs, and sell those, that is appropriation. Wearing things given to you or made for you or buying things made by Indigenous and Black people is not appropriation. It is appreciation, and it is uplifting, and it gives to people. It helps people out, right? So braids is global. And we talk about that a lot, but I don't want to get into it a lot. Braids is global, right? Or I don't want to right now, just because I'm trying to go somewhere else. So this is the difference that I want people to understand, that appreciation is buying from, uplifting, showing off. Look at these earrings, they were made by so-and-so, and this is where you can get their information. You should go get a pair for them. Or, wearing red dresses and somebody going, well, what's that red dress? That looks really beautiful. And you're like, it's absolutely this. This is MMIW. We were missing 26% per capita of our sisters every year, right? So these are things that are appreciative. These are things that uplift. These are things that give to community. These are things that do for community. These are showing off the beautiful things that community can do. That is appreciation. Appropriation is to take any one of those things and make a profit off of it, or to wear it in a manner that it's not supposed to be worn, or to mock culture with it. That is appropriation. So you can absolutely go and wear feathers in your hair as long, again, as they are not birds of prey feathers and you're not following Indigenous Turtle Islander designs or other Indigenous designs. And that is not appropriation or appreciation at that point. That is following your own cultural heritage. You can absolutely decorate yourself with these things. You can absolutely decorate yourself with different furs. I have sealskin earrings made by Makwa as well. Seal fur earrings because I'm silky. I'm descended to the seal people. And so I have sealskin fur earrings. You can go and use these different things to decorate your body and decorate yourself, as long as you are not taking specific designs and patterns from different people. With that, I am going to go into what I try and say at the end of all of my lives, because I've only got about 20 more minutes and I get easily distracted. I didn't really go over how we're biologically nurturing and communal. And so I'm going to touch on that really quick right now. Biologically, we know that we are nurturing and communal as a species, that we must have nurture and we must have community. How do we know this? We're the only species with what we call mandatory midwifery. Between the shape of our heads and the shape of our shoulders forming kind of a T and the pelvic outlet in this oval shape, we have to turn our babies twice to get them out of the womb. So we have to have community assisting us to give birth. We have to have somebody else there who knows how to do this to assist us to give birth. This means that we must have community. We have 5 life stages from neonate to adult. Neonate meaning firstborn, and adult meaning full brain development. Currently, that is 25 years. We are the longest of life stages. Whales have really long childhoods. Bonobos, orangutans, and elephants have really long childhoods, and yet we still have the longest of childhood. We have this long childhood for our brain development so that our brain has the ability to get all the knowledge. Like, we have so much knowledge in our brain. So our brain has the ability to get all those knowledges. We have these extended periods of brain development. You know, the first few years, we're learning the world around us, and then we're learning how to interact with people, and then we're learning how to utilize things, right? So this means we must have community to nurture us from infancy, newborn, to adulthood. We see even today, there's a study that came out yesterday that talks about, or within the last week, that talks about current hunter-gatherer indigenous groups that live in communities. And they show that having just 2 parents raise a child is really unhealthy. You actually need the entire community's interactions. Now, this is because, you know, maybe your mom is a really good hunter and she needs to go out and hunt when you're born. And so your grandmother takes care of you, right? Maybe you know, you, as you learn and as you're growing, you're really interested in flint napping. Watching somebody nap flint just sparks in your brain. And so you are drawn to the person who does the flint napping. And it's not your mom or your dad or your grandfather. You're just watching somebody flint napping. And so you're going to learn from them. They are going to nurture you through community, that nurture of knowledge through community. No one person can have all the knowledge, right? You need many different knowledges, and what sings to you is what you end up contributing to community, right? This is before we have roles, right? Nobody should really have roles in society that they're supposed to fulfill if their brain doesn't fulfill those roles, right? So biologically, we are nurturing and communal. We live in a time, in a society, in a space that tells us that these things are bad. The rise of violence is 10,000 years ago, and it comes with the rise of stratification. It comes with the start of owning land and people and other things like animals, living, breathing things. And it is accompanied by othering, Othering. I know I slur sometimes, which is the barbarians in the hills are going to take your food, so you have to pay me so I can keep this army in place so that I can steal from you while telling you it's the barbarians in the hills, which translates down to then it's nations, and then it's gender, and then it's religion, and then it's race. And currently today, it's all of those things, as well as being immigrants or being houseless, right? Othering is hate your next door neighbor instead of me who's stealing from you. right? That's 10,000 years old. This is not who we are as a species. We are nurturing and communal as a species. And so you live in a society that teaches you to be nurturing and communal as a bad thing, that you are not nurturing and communal, that that's the wrong thing to do, that you shouldn't be feeding people, that you shouldn't be taking care of people, that only two people are supposed to raise a child, that we're not supposed to all be interacting, that we're supposed to be very disconnected. And because we live in a society that teaches us things that are very opposite of who we are supposed to be as a species and what is healthy for our species, we have a high presence of depression and anxiety and mental illness. These things are a healthy response. Depression and anxiety are a healthy response to an unhealthy society. Your society is unhealthy, and you can't fit into an unhealthy society without giving up the things that make you you, right? So when you're sitting here going, I'm the problem, I can't fit into this. I'm the problem, I'm always depressed. I'm the problem, I can't do this. It's me because I can't fit. It is not you. You are having a healthy reaction to an unhealthy situation. It is those of us in this world who can see that the world needs to change. They can see that it's an unhealthy situation. They can see that this is not the right way for us to live, that can affect change, because you can only affect change when you understand and see the need for change. If you don't think you can change, if you don't know you need to change, if you think you're innately evil, so you can't fight against that innate evilness anyways, you don't have the concept of the ability or the need to change. Yet if you can see it, if you can feel it, if it causes those pains and that anxiety and that lack of like just comfort and safety, you can see that the change needs to happen. We are all worthy of love and life just by breathing. It doesn't matter how exploitable you are by somebody else, because that's what the money thing is. It's how much somebody can exploit out of you so that you can live a bare basic subsistence. And when they're done exploiting you, they're going to kick you out in the streets, call you houseless, and make you the next thing to hate. So it doesn't matter how exploitable you are by others. You are worthy just by breathing. You are worthy just by being alive. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of grace. You are worthy of safety just by being alive. I didn't say sex. Don't think that you deserve sex just because you're alive. I'm not taking it there. And you can take that incel thought process out, okay? But you are worthy of breathing. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of safety. You are worthy of compassion just by being alive, okay? So I'm going to ask you to give yourself grace today, to give yourself love, and to give yourself compassion today. Most likely you do that for everybody else and you forget to do it for yourself because you think you're not worthy of it. You are worthy of it. Give yourself grace, give yourself love, give yourself compassion. These are necessary things for humanity to live, for every single human being to live, right? And you, being alive, are worthy of it, okay? You don't have to be exploitable. You don't have to be taken advantage of. You don't have to do anything. Now, of course, it's always better to do things for the rest of the community too, right? We all, you can't separate yourself from community because part of that is community and part of what you're missing is community. Now, don't get me wrong. I hide in my house. I'm becoming agoraphobic. It's really fucking scary out there. I get it, right? You do need to contribute. You do need to have something that you're giving, right? Community is important. That's what you're missing anyways. How do we change this, right? And this is one of these things that I get asked all the time. Well, how do you change it? How do you fix it? What do you fucking do about it? Land back on a global scale. Returning tending and governance to Indigenous people on a global scale does not mean get the fuck out. That's a European concept. What it means is the way to take care of the land, the way to take care of each other, the way to interact is returned to an Indigenous governance that has an animistic mindset, that takes care of that brings community about, and stops the global climate destruction. Not climate change. Climate change happens. That's natural. The global climate destruction that is being caused currently by Western-based agriculture and Western-based thought process. So land back on a global scale, because there are indigenous people in every region of this globe who are still practicing indigenous practices, still trying to belong to the land that they are belonging to, right? Land back on a global scale returns tending and governance on a global scale. It changes the climate destruction that we are currently enacting, and it changes the communal structure that is causing the problems. There are different ways to do that. You start by decolonizing your brain. You can only decolonize space if you are a member of a group that has been colonized. You cannot be the colonizer and decolonize space. You can be from the decolonizer ancestry and help the colonized decolonize, but they still need to guide the decolonization. So decolonizing, you start by decolonizing your thought. You start by decolonizing your brain. And then you go to the local nation. You go to the local indigenous group and you say, this is my list of skills. What can I do to help decolonize? This is my list of skills. What can I do to meet the needs that you have for your sovereignty, for your people? Okay. So I'm going to tell you, you should not go in and tell them what you think you should do. And you should also not go in and say, what can I do, without giving an information of what you can do, right? I don't want to have to decide what you can do, give you 10 things, and every single thing you're like, oh shit, I can't do that. Can you build the web design? No, I can't do that. Can you stand at front line? No, I can't do that. I don't want to have to go through 10 different things before I get to the point, right? You need to tell me what you're capable of so that I can tell you where I need you, right? So definitely go in with an idea of what you're capable of so that you can give support, right? And definitely don't go into anywhere and tell people what you think you need to do for them. That's white thought, that's shit thought, that's colonized thought process. And we don't know what other people need. I don't even know what my partner needs unless he articulates what he needs. He doesn't know what I need unless I articulate what I need. Okay. So how do we get to that point? Land back on a global scale. How do we get to land back? We decolonize our thinking. How do we start decolonizing our thinking? By understanding that every single one of us is worthy of breathing, is worthy of existence, and is worthy of love just by breathing. By understanding that you do not need to be exploited by a government, by a boss, by each other, by your partner, by anybody to be worthy of love. You are worthy of love just by existence. You're worthy of grace just by existence. I am going to take off because I need to go and do my things, right? I want to again remind you, doesn't matter what you're doing, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what your color, doesn't matter where you are. You are worthy of love and grace and compassion just by existing. Just by existing. So please give yourself that love and grace today. You give it to everybody else, give it to yourself. You absolutely deserve it. You absolutely need it. And I love you because you exist. Whether or not you're a troll, whether or not you're a sibling, I love you because you exist and you're helping us move forward and helping us get to a better space. Take care of yourself, give yourself grace and compassion, give yourself love. Thank you, everybody, for coming in, hearing me, talking in the chat. Thank you to my mods. I have some badass mods always, and we didn't have to turn off the comments once during this live, and I want to really absolutely shake that out because we were up over a couple hundred a few times, and even then still did not need to turn off the comments. So thank you so much. I think we have like 3 in here, and they were kicking fucking ass, and I do want to say thank you to Saba. I think I saw Mia in here as well. I know I saw Jedi in here. And I may have missed a couple, and I apologize because you know how I'll sit there and get in the comments. So I was really trying to ignore them. But I want to put out a thank you to all of my mods because they really kicked ass. And thank you, everybody, for hearing me and listening to me. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for your time and your day.